Alright, well, now we come to Justice League Crisis on Two Earths. Now, what's interesting about this one is that originally based on a Grant Morrison story from the early 2000s, I think actually the year 2000, I think called Justice League Earth 2, this movie was originally intended as a possible story arc in the Justice League Unlimited TV series, but after that show ended, they basically brought it back in the form of, or they basically they shelved this idea, placed it on the shelf to gather dust, and then brought it back as a standalone animated movie, completely removing all ties to the Justice League Unlimited TV show. It stands on its own. And the basic plot of this is that in an alternate universe, the the world is basically held under the totalitarian rule of basically an evil version of the Justice League called the Crime Syndicate. Um, yeah, they're working to stop crimes, but they're taking away people's freedoms. They basically have the President Slade Wilson under their thumb. So the only one who opposes them is the Resistance, led by a noble, good guy Lex Luthor. So so basically, the only hope that Luthor sees is to go to an alternate version of Earth, i.e., our version of Earth, get our Justice League, and bring them back to his own dimension to topple the crime syndicate. That's the basic premise. So, nothing really too special about this one, but at the same time, pretty enjoyable. It's still a pretty enjoyable action flick with some very notably good voice acting, and it's a suitably entertaining Justice League story. You will not be bored. Um, it doesn't really add anything new to these characters, but but if that's not what you're looking for, if you're just looking for a an entertaining Justice League story arc that's reasonably well written, has some very exciting action, then you will get what you came for. It's it's certainly more entertaining in my book than Justice League New Frontier. Again, that could just be my own taste talking, but I found this to be infinitely more interesting, um, given given the kind of role reversals that we have, like Lex Luthor as a good guy, and Slade Wilson being a wimpy president. So yeah, it's a pretty neat idea, and toward the end, it really kind of ramps up into a very interesting finale with probably the best character in the movie. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The voice acting is pretty solid. Sorry, I have to put my glasses on to see the screen. The voice cast is actually pretty accomplished. Yeah, it has some celebrities on there, but it's kind of an even mix between celebrities and traditional voice acting, and traditional voice actors. We have Mark Harmon as Superman, Mark Harmon from NCIS, Billy Baldwin as Batman, Vanessa Marshall as Wonder Woman, she's a voice actress, Josh Keaton as The Flash, he's a voice actor, very prolific voice and mocap actor Nolan North as the Green Lantern, Jonathan Adams as the Martian Manhunter, Brian Bloom as Ultraman, Gina Torres as Superwoman, and the best character in the movie, James Woods as Owlman, and Chris Noth from The Good Wife as Lex Luthor. And we also have Bruce Davidson as, honestly kind of miscast as Slade Wilson. But regardless, all of these guys do a pretty good job. Mark Harmon probably gets the least to do because a lot of the time he is kind of just there to pummel his opponents. Superman doesn't really do a whole lot in this movie, but again, this more represents what I feel a Justice League movie should do, in that evenly balances the characters, giving them each their moment in the sun. So, so leads Mark Harmon leads a reasonably diverting world weariness to the role of Superman. You can tell that he's very experienced. Maybe that comes with age, but I don't know. William Baldwin is probably the biggest surprise. Now, I've never really thought much of Billy Baldwin, basically because he's often seen. I don't necessarily agree with this, but Billy Baldwin is honestly often seen, or at least by people I talk to, as the poor man's Alec Baldwin. But, I've never agreed with that, because Beau Bridges is seen as the poor man's Jeff Bridges, and I think Beau Bridges has more charisma than Jeff Bridges, but that's just me. Or at least Beau doesn't get on my nerves like Jeff sometimes does. I'm getting way off topic here. William Baldwin does do a pretty good job as Batman. He doesn't really change his voice a whole lot, but then again, you don't really see his Bruce Wayne, so we can't really blame him for not changing his voice. He basically does a darker, more brooding version of his own voice, but at the same time, you can really sense this kind of fragile humanity behind that. It's an interesting choice, and I think it works. Vanessa Marshall as Wonder Woman is just kind of standard. I mean, she's there, she's fine, but honestly, she doesn't really hold up to women like Susan Eisenberg, Kerry Russell. She's just adequate as Wonder Woman. And that may have something to do with the fact that she doesn't really get a whole lot to work with, because this is kind of an ensemble piece, and there's only so much you can do with each character before you have to try and balance them with other characters. Josh Keaton and Nolan North do fare better than her as the Flash and the Green Lantern, respectively. Josh Keaton's very youthful, energetic voice lends itself well to the Flash, and Nolan North, he doesn't change his voice, but he adds kind of a subtle quality to his voice where he's kind of like a beat cop. He's kind of like, oh, isn't this outside my jurisdiction? So it's very subtle what he does with his voice, but because you can obviously still tell it's him, but that subtlety pays off in providing a version of this Green Lantern that I actually find kind of refreshing, as opposed to the very energetic roles that we normally see Hal Jordan in. And to see him as this kind of serious beat cop it works well enough. Jonathan Adams was actually really good as the Martian Manhunter. I mean, he's not quite as good as Carl Lumbly, but he still has that very alien, exotic quality to his voice. He still sounds suitably mysterious, and at the same time, you can tell that there's a lot of wisdom in his voice. Every single word he says is calculated, and you can tell that from given his very deep, smooth voice. So I thought he really worked as the Martian Manhunter. Brian Bloom as Ultraman, he doesn't really get a whole lot to do other than just be kind of snide. Gina Torres as Superwoman she gets more development than Wonder Woman. So I'm trying to think of the words to describe her, because she's a more sadistic version of Wonder Woman in that yeah, she doesn't really think men are she doesn't really think men are the superior race. She does view men as inferior, except for Owlman. But she sees them as kind of her playthings. I mean, she likes toying with her opponents, and the menacing sarcasm that Gina Torres puts into this performance, I think, suits the character very well. I mean, you can tell that she has a very powerful voice. You can tell that she has a very that she is a powerful figure, but at the same time, she a lot of the time reins that back in favor of that menacing sarcasm I was just talking about. So really, really good on her part. Um, Bruce Davidson is okay as Slade Wilson. Like I said, I think he's a bit of a miscast, and I realize this is supposed to be a weaker version of Slade Wilson than we've seen. And like I said, Bruce Davidson does a good job, but I think he was just a little too. So where I'm looking for, I don't really think that if you're doing an alternate universe story, I think you have to be able to sell. I think you have to be able to sell this actor as the character in both universes, and I just can't see Bruce Davidson playing the evil Deathstroke in our universe. But with that said, Chris Noth is one of the highlights as Lex Luthor, and he's kind of like Mark Harmon in that you can tell that he is a very world-weary character, and you can easily see him playing the evil Lex Luthor in our dimension. Um, but at the same time, while also being credible as the evil Lex Luthor, or conceivably being credible as the evil Lex Luthor, um, you also buy him equally as much as the very grim, noble leader of the Resistance, and the very, I don't want to say gravelly voice it's a very, very, very slight gravel that they give Chris Noth. Like he's been around a bit, and for this particular version of the character, that was suitable. Let's see, and the last but not least in the cast is James Woods as Owlman. Now, James Woods is one of the, when you think of modern day charisma, you think of James Woods. You think of guys like James Woods, at least. So when I heard he was going to be Owlman, I was kind of trepidatious, because the way that they play Owlman in this movie, he's this very monotone, very quiet, very methodical character. He's a darker version of Batman, but he doesn't immediately come across as darker. He's more machine-like than Batman. He seems to have less empathy and seems to be less in touch with his emotions. And James Woods surprisingly does that very, very well. Maybe it's his previous experience in voice acting that's helping him feel comfortable here, but he just does a phenomenal job and honestly, I can't imagine Owlman being played by anyone else. So yeah, James Woods he's perfect as Owlman in my opinion. Let's see. What else? The action scenes are still very exhilarating, probably a little too much of them, and I think they make Batman out to be a little too much of a wimp at times when he gets his butt kicked by Superwoman and Owlman, or at least for a time before he outsmarts them. But anyway, the action scenes are still very accomplished, as is the standard for these animated movies. They do get some pretty cool combat scenarios, i.e., fighting in the air, and Owlman does get a good line like "Get off my plane." So yeah, there are a plethora of cool combat scenarios that this group of this group of characters gets to engage in. The script is also pretty good. Like I said, it's interesting to see that the alternate versions of these characters, even though the alternate version of the Justice League a lot of the time does come off as kind of two-dimensional. They are severely underdeveloped, underdefined, and they are kind of painted, or some of them. Like, Superwoman and Owlman are okay, but guys like Ultraman, Johnny Quick, they are just painted with the broadest possible stroke of oh, they're evil. We never really see anything beneath that. Well, I suppose we kind of do with Johnny Quick near the end, but at that point, it's a case of too little, too late. So I wish we would have gotten to know. I wish we would have gotten to know the crime syndicate a little more, so that we would have a clearer picture of, okay, why did they resort to this? I have to assume, I've never actually read the Grant Morrison story arc, but I assume it's kind of like the Justice League episode A Better World, where some earth-shattering events caused a chain reaction that caused the Justice League to take the law into their own hands. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating right now, but I wish we would have seen a little more in the way of motivation for the crime syndicate. But for their lack of motivation is made up for in Owlman's motivation. This could have just been your standard, oh, I want to destroy everything because I'm evil character. But no, he's kind of like the Question, in that he has this kind of conspiracy theorist mindset where he wants to uncover all of the secrets. He's very paranoid in his work. He doesn't really give 2 cents about what's going on around him. He just wants to discover the secret of the alternate dimensions. And when you actually find out his motivation, he wants to matter. He wants to, because he actually does make some pretty sound logic, or at least sound in terms of comic book logic. He makes the assumption that no matter what choice we make, there's always another universe where an alternate version of us makes the opposite choice. So really, none of our choices matter. So his goal is to go to, what was it, Earth Prime or something? He wants to go to the first Earth, the first dimension, and destroy the dimension, hence destroying everything in existence and everything that ever will exist. Why? Because he sees it as the only choice that would matter. And as crazy as that sounds, when you hear it coming from this character, this very emotionally disconnected character, it actually does make sense. You do buy that he doesn't really care about anyone else. You buy that he wants to uncover secrets. He wants to break new ground in this interdimensional field. So him wanting to make, quote unquote, the only choice that matters, as crazy as it sounds, is actually pretty sound motivation for him. I don't think it would have worked if someone like Lex Luthor did it, or Two-Face or whatever. I think it only works if someone as unhinged as Owlman does it. So yeah, overall, I like this movie. I mean, I can't really say that it's one of their best, but it's serviceable enough. It's a good time. Is it the best Justice League story I've ever seen? No, but it is one of the better ones, in my opinion. It does have plenty of interesting ideas. You do get the sense that a lot is at stake. It is interesting to see this alternate world. We don't really spend a whole lot of time in our world. And to see some of the role reversals, like Lex Luthor as the hero, Slade Wilson as the doormat, and to see our Justice League kind of interact with things in the other world does make for a relatively interesting viewing experience, and one that is far more entertaining than if they just had wall-to-wall action scenes. There is a lot of action here, and it is handled very well, but it's fairly balanced. So yeah, overall, my impression of this was positive. Do I have any desire to watch it again when I have a lot of other great entries in this in this series to watch? Honestly, it's hard to say. It is one of the better Justice League movies that they've done, but I honestly don't really know how well it holds up in comparison to the TV series. It's good, and that's really the all-encompassing word I can say, is that it's good. You get what you came for. They do it well. The voice acting's good, the action's good, the animation is good, the script is good. With although some of the characters are a little underdeveloped, and like I said, there may be one too many action scenes, but other than that, I basically walked away happy.